everyone. Welcome to Alexander Agnew's Oral. He's been my senior assistant and my RT leader as well this year. It's been a blast having him. I think you'll get a lot out of today's message. My name is Jay Zika. This is Johnny Custer and AJ Brea. And so please pray with me before we begin. Dear God, we thank you for this opportunity to let Alexander speak about something he's very passionate about. Please give him the clarity of mind that he'll need. And please let this be a wonderful time for everyone who's watching. Let us celebrate Alexander and his abilities. And please bless this morning. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
All right, how's my breathing? I'm probably fine. As a child, I always preferred jumping into the pool head first instead of dipping my feet in to test the waters. So I see no reason to deviate from this tradition now, so we'll start off abruptly. I'd like to open with two questions today. Number one, are you pleased with how Christianity is doing in America? And two, do you think God is pleased with how it's doing in America? Since 1973, 62.5 million children have been killed due to Roe v. Wade in the U.S. alone, and 1.6 billion abortions have occurred worldwide. Almost 15% of Americans have used illicit drugs within the last month. Sin is encouraged and praised, and nonconformity is denounced as intolerance. Believers who preach an undiluted truth are shunned as non-progressives and bigots. In schools, critical thinking is discouraged, and conformity is required. Nations wage countless wars across the world in which tens of thousands die for no greater good than economic gain. True evil goes unpunished, and defiance by the church is decried by false believers who shout, "We're better than that." We cower, we back down, and we shake our fists, declaring not one more step or else, as lines in the sand are erased faster than we can draw them. Christianity's influence has fallen from the world's most powerful religion and dominating cultural force to an effeminate laughingstock and punching bag of the Western world. How have we gotten here? Truth is no longer recognized as an objective thing. A purpose for life has been deemed a falsehood. The people of the world cry out in pride and fear as the prophecy of Nietzsche's parable of the madman comes true. God is dead, and we have killed him. There is no purpose, no greater good, no unifying force to compel humanity, despite the best efforts of humans to create one, to replace the hole ripping out God left. Men turn to whatever can give them some relief from the crushing existentialism that defines our world today. Today's society has turned from truth to pleasure and power. Governments care not for the masses underneath them, only for what they can extract from them. There's seemingly no place left for Christianity in this system we inhabit. This is a terrible time for Christianity. A Christian, upon entering college, has a 66% chance to leave the faith, where a child only has a 6 in 10 chance of being born into a Christian household. And that's just in the US. Worldwide, the chances are only 3 in 10. Those are just the odds of being someone who calls themselves a Christian. The odds of being a Christian believing in a traditional Orthodox biblical worldview are even worse. The odds of that worldwide are only 1 in 20. Do you think God is happy looking at this? Compare this with what we once were. Europe, North America, South America, the Near East, Northern Africa, all regions filled with religiously founded nations, where Christian values, truths, populations, and wills forged a better culture and living. Entire nations worked toward the salvation of their inhabitants. A time when a man was least likely to fall away from the faith upon entering the world. A time where the majority of these populations had Christianity as a central part of their lives. A time where the chances of a child being born into a Christian household, in a Christian community, and in a Christian nation were higher than any other point in time. Now, comparing this to our current setting, this doesn't seem so bad. Wouldn't it be amazing if we were able to return to a time such as that? If we had a nation for Christians, for the kingdom, it could then shine like a beacon for the world to see and then believe. If we were to reforge a great nation to thrive under the banner of our Savior, to attempt to recreate a world where Christianity could flourish and spread again like wildfire, where do we start? The establishment of a nation with both church and government centered on Christ will not only allow for a greater chance at salvation for the vast majority of the population, but will also allow for an objective moral framework and culture that can be defended against corruption and degeneration. If the government is held to the doctrines of Christianity, then it can function in tandem with the church, so the church can carry out its duty to proselytize and guide souls towards Christ, towards salvation in Christ. In its ideal state, human society and its governance should all be completely focused on God. The Christian theologian Rosus Rushdoony outlined 4 foundations for a Christian nation, each of them reflecting and pointing back to God as the ultimate foundation of our world. The first foundation for our society is its moral basis. It is the cornerstone of life and law and the culture. We acquire a basis for morality from religion. If the religion the people follow defines the culture they live in. If the people follow a religion that gives a solid groundwork for truth and stability, then the culture thrives. If it chooses a religion that doesn't give a solid foundation for truth, it is destined to fail. I'll divide religion into 2 general categories, theistic and political. Within a theistic system, morality and law is assumed to stem from God. The order of the universe is God-given and absolute, and therefore man's order must be patterned in terms of God's will. In political religion, the political system is the source of morality and law. Therefore, man guides and determines his own absolutes. Take, for examples of political religions, the Soviet bloc, the Chinese Communist Party, or Ho Chi Minh's cult of state. In political religion, objective morality defined by God is replaced by subjective, practical morality defined by man. The divide between these 2 systems is clear. Theistic religion assumes objective morality centered around God, while political religion assumes subjective morality centered around man. Applying this to our theoretical Christian nation, if we use the Bible as its moral foundation, it would be able to come to consistent and steady conclusions concerning morality in the world around it. This would influence both culture and further legislation. Using the Bible not just as a litmus test for legislation to be compared against, but instead using the Bible as a template from which all legislation would be crafted from. Abortion would be deemed immoral because it contradicts the morality of the Bible. Murder would be immoral as well, along with theft, adultery, slander, and all of the other examples the Bible gives us of what is immoral. Our nation has to have a moral basis in order to form these opinions. And thanks to God's gift of the Bible, we have the ultimate reference point for what our God deems moral. If the first foundation is the moral basis, then the second foundation of a society is the government. The government is the legislation and social organization of the religious morality, the system of morality given legal influence. For a government not to have a moral basis would be to assign random moral value to actions. And not only must a government have a religion upon which to base its laws, it must have a religion to exist at all. A state is incapable of survival without a set of core beliefs that inform their concepts of life and law. The state is a religious institution just as much as the church is, for it is the enforcer and guardian of the religion the nation is built upon, whether it be theistic or political. Taking Christian society as an example, both the church and the government are religious organizations. The church as an organization of grace, and the government as an organization of justice. The government's purpose in a society varies depending on the religion of the nation. If it is a theistic religion, it deals in administering the justice of God to the citizens. Whereas in a political religion, it functions as a savior of the people, as a means of salvation for its inhabitants. Going back to our ideal nation, our Christian state would interpret the moral judgments of our moral authority, the Bible, and put penalties and rewards in place to enforce them. The penalty for the immoral act of murder is prison. For theft, it is paying back what was stolen plus interest. If someone violates the Bible's moral codex, then the government's purpose is to enact judgment upon it. As we will later see, the function of the church is to counterbalance this with grace and encouragement. The government should act as an office of accountability, to encourage the ideal in the individual. The third foundation of social order is sovereignty. Who's in charge? Who has ultimate authority over everything? There are 2 main claimants to sovereignty, God and the government. These claimants are in direct opposition, and only one is actually in control. As our God states, he is sovereign over all things, in complete control and authority over his entire creation. And similarly, all governments claim complete sovereignty over the resources of their nations, to tax and exploit as they see fit, even to utilize and expend the people's lives that dwell within it as they see necessary. To this end, government has a choice, just as every individual does, to devote itself to the kingdom of heaven, or to deviate from the path God has set for it. If it chooses its own path, it follows down it to the best of its ability, till its inevitable corruption or collapse. But if it chooses God and devotion to the kingdom, it is then able to embrace a more stable and grounded existence than the alternative. A government that denies God's claims sets itself up for humanism's worst fates: corruption, subjective morality and execution, and even possibly leading its inhabitants to straying from the Lord. Our God claims sovereignty over all, so it isn't inconsistent for us to demand that the world conform to his ideals and his truths. The fourth foundation is grace, which is necessary to redeem and save the hearts of man from the inherent sin and the inherent evil in the world. No matter what worldview a government ascribes to, they all believe that there is evil. Whether evil be erosion of liberty, perceived social injustices, inherent sin of man, or even economic inequality. For a political religion, evil is not within man, but within the environment. It is the government's responsibility to shape and cultivate the environment to save man. When the government changes the social order, it is the state's attempt at the salvation of its people, to destroy the old environment to save man. However, for Christianity, the solution to evil in the world is God's grace, an acknowledgement that sin is not just in the environment, but an internal sin nature as well. There is nothing the government can do to cure man's inherent sin nature, so it is better to relent and leave it to the saving grace of Jesus. To live freely and happily, man must live under law and order, but law and order alone cannot save man. Up to this point, we've talked almost exclusively on government and formulating what it should and shouldn't be. But now we've finally arrived at the traditional and ancient pillar of our religion, the church. Christianity would not thrive without a church. In the example of our ideal state, the government's desire to save their people should be manifested in pointing them towards true salvation and grace, the one they alone cannot provide. What they can do, however, is assist in the salvific process by making the path to God's grace smoother and easier, by pointing to the church for their ministry to the people. Not just bringing in new believers, but the children of those who already believe as well. How much better would our nation be if every child was brought up under a biblical education system, removed from the toxic and antithetical secular system they are subject to now? The church, as stated earlier, is a ministry of grace, and would be there in much the same role as it holds in our society today. It would foster community, codependence on fellow believers, spiritual growth, and evangelism to the unbelievers. With the government providing the administration of justice, and the church providing an avenue to salvation, grace, and redemption, and both deferring ultimate sovereignty to God. The church is essential in its ideal society, just as it is essential in our own. The government can never replace it, only protect it and defend it. In this ideal world, the state comes alongside the church to work together for the people, not to be constantly at odds as it is today. The state would lead the people to the church, and the church would then lead people to Christ. That is the ultimate goal of all of this: redemption and salvation for as many souls as possible. Now that we've gone through and structured an ideal that we should strive for, we must decide on what the path is towards this goal. What are the steps to achieve this revived Christian world? Well, thanks to the Lord's great mercy, it doesn't seem so hard from where we are. Every Christian should focus on building community, spreading the faith, encouraging solid doctrine, and instructing your children in the ways of the faith. And the same steps Paul encouraged the early believers to follow in, so too are we called to step back into a dark world. Not as recent generations have done, in which you were only a Christian second, but instead as a Christian first. Your motivation should be for the kingdom, and your own gain second. Build community. Serve the kingdom today, even with the smallest of your actions, so it can grow tomorrow in great ways. If we truly understand what our God has done for us, then we should be stumbling over ourselves to devote our lives to the furtherance of his kingdom. Allow your dedication to God throughout your life to bleed through and create something greater, something bigger than the sum of just your contributions. A world where every child born has the highest chance of being saved in history. The establishment of a government centered on Christ would not only allow for a greater chance at salvation for the citizens, but would also allow for a moral framework that will not degenerate and shift as time goes on. To build a nation for Christ, for Christians, who are becoming more and more disenfranchised and outcast from the new political religions of the world today. This would be to give a home to God's people, to offer a bastion of hope against the torrent of sin and evil flooding through the world. A place where believers could trust in their nation and in their neighbors. Then united, they could turn to face the dark seas of fallen humanity, to see the true state of man without God. Today, small pockets of believers look out into those inky depths of godless man and feel despair. For what can a few do against such a dark world filled with such seemingly triumphant evil? Apathy seems the only response. But then instead of feeling crushing hopelessness, they would feel the warm hands of fellow believers next to them, adding their strength to others. Those bright reunited souls would then be able to wade out into the depths together, sustained against corruption with faith and community, to pull blackened souls out of the water to join in a procession for Christ and let them find solace in a haven for fellow believers. There is more at stake than just our nation. Billions of souls will be damned if we do nothing. How would you feel waking up in a world where not a single baby more has been aborted? A world where drug use has fallen down to near nothing, where the devout and faithful are commended by their neighbors and their nation, where every child born has to do nothing but follow in the path they were born in to be saved. Do you think God would be more pleased with this world? Christianity has been passive and apathetic for too long. The time is coming for Christianity to stop shifting responsibility onto future generations and begin a Christian restoration. For all my life, God has spoken to me through coincidences and unexpected events. That was how I arrived at this topic, actually. God told me to speak on these things, and I'd like to think it's because one of you hearing this will take it to heart and carry on the ideas God told me to impart onward to hopefully forge a better future. If you are that person, I pray for you, for there is no greater burden to carry than the one designed for you by our God. Thank you.
Very well done. I was chewed up at the end, so.
Good stuff.
So, does it feel good?
No, this is the hard part.
Well, it's a very thought-provoking thesis, so there should be a lot of interesting questions, and
that's why I'm worried.
I know you'll be able to respond well then.
Okay.
But to start it out, easy, as everyone else has been asked, what are your plans for next year?
Midland College for 2 years, and then I'm probably going to transfer to Tech for a major in biomedical engineering. So
biomedical engineering?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to do with that?
Bionics, prosthetics, that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I'm quite excited for it.
Cyborgs?
Sure, yeah. But, if you want to call it that. Sounds cooler.
So I want you to elaborate a little on that last point. How did you feel like God was speaking to you about this?
So I it's been a recurring theme that like God kind of talks to me through things happening in weird ways or like unexpected things happening, and so it just like small coincidences built up and events happened, and I felt like God was telling me that like the topic I originally wanted to do was about the Crusades, and God told me no, and you need to do this instead. And so I doubt I could pinpoint like a specific event, but just small things nudging me towards what he wanted me to do. So yeah.
Interesting. Cool. So which people or what sort of events or other things have influenced you to come to these conclusions?
I'd say the biggest influence on me has probably been my dad. So his my conversations with him, I really enjoy them. They're just really enjoyable and really enlightening. And I think that, and then also my conversations with you, just on different theological topics, just help me shape what I think about these topics. And so yeah.
Cool. Yeah, because you wrote basically 8 or 9 versions of this to get to where it is today, so it took a lot of thought. So I commend you for that. All right, so a little bit about the ideas before I move on to Guster. Can you go into more detail about what a political religion is?
It would be basically any government system that doesn't base itself on God. It's anything that claims it's the highest authority there is. And so it would be I'd argue a lot of the European nations that the EU, that sort of stuff, if it claims to be the highest authority, I'd say it's a political religion, or it claims that it alone determines what is the law and what is truth. I'd say that's the definition.
How does it get people? How do systems like that get people to buy into the political religion?
I'd say a large part of it is just the advance of humanism in our world. Like, everyone wants to claim that they're the biggest thing out there, and because it's fun to be, you know, the big one on the pile, and to say, like, this is like a nation by man for man. That's an attractive thing to have. And I'd say part of it is also, like, I mentioned this in my paper, but, like, just attractive policies. There's buy-in for you to basically give up your will to just another group of men, and so there's this incentive for it.
So, in what other ways can a government or state, like, influence the worldviews and the cultures of its citizens?
Well, I'd say to a large part. I've talked with Schumann about this a little bit. It's like giving money to certain, like, organizations or stuff, because, like, if the government is giving, like, loans or grants to certain organizations, they're encouraging, like, development in that field. And so if they're giving money to, like, religious organizations that are, like, if they're giving money to, like, mosques, that they're encouraging, like, development in, like, Islam in the country. And so I'd say that's a large part. And so, like, whatever they put effort into, whatever they divert attention to, is that's how you kind of determine what they're referring to.
Okay, so that's kind of like a positive way. I mean, positive in the sense of, like, addition, that they can direct something. What about in, like, a negative way? Can laws influence?
I'd say oppression is a big one. So, like in the example of, like, so I'll use a real life example for this one. So a couple weeks ago, there was, like, during Easter, a college did, like, an Easter egg hunt on campus, and there was a huge, like, uproar about that. Like, you're being insensitive to other religions by doing this, and, like, the Christian organizer got death threats about it, and the college that was doing it was being heavily funded by, like, the government, like government grants and government loans, and it's, in that way, it's like you're passively encouraging this by funding, like, this. By funding it, you're encouraging the ideology that it supports. And so, and then just, like, the standard answers of, like, you know, arresting, killing people, like, that disagree with what the state is doing and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, because it sounds, in many ways, it sounds kind of like that's what's going on in China, right? Sort of this positive and negative ways of manipulating these people into doing what they want to do.
Yeah.
What the government wants them to do. So, all right, I'll let Custer have it back. Mr. Custer.
Alexander, well done. This certainly is one paper that's garnered a lot of thought, and so I kind of am skeptical that we can actually get through all the good meat that it has, even though I hope. But we'll try. To start off, how would you define a religion?
Oh, I put this in my paper, didn't I? Did I? At least one version of the 9. I define religion as, like, anything that garners zeal or, like, heavy support from it. And, oh gosh, it's probably in there somewhere. Is that it? Hey, a cause, principle, or system of beliefs held to with ardor or faith. Yeah, that was the religion I kind of operated off of to make my definitions work.
So it allows for a political religion, one that doesn't have to have any kind of supernatural thought.
Yeah.
Or, as long as it has dedication or faith to it, then you can have it.
One of the things I mentioned was, like, you don't have to be it doesn't have to be spiritual to be a religion. So, like, it's like, you know, like the phrase, like, communism is a religion, that gets thrown around a lot, usually in joking, but that's more true than I feel like we give it credit for, because it's like you really are putting your faith and your hope and your, like, future in this idea that this will save me. And so,
yeah, and in some sense, right, human beings can't help but have faith, right? That's just integral to how we operate.
Yeah, religion's built in. Yeah.
So I think you're right there, and I think we need to have this basis. Now, so getting to some of the other parts where I have some questions about how this continues. Are how does a nation become? Is it to be overtly Christian? is that the best way that we can accomplish this project?
I'm tempted to say yes, just from like historical precedent. So, for an example of that, I'll give like the Roman Empire. So, like Constantine converted like the official religion of the Roman Empire to Christianity. Christianity wasn't a majority religion in the nation at that time. It was possibly a major player in the eastern half. Like generously, they were a majority there. There was 6 million believers in the Roman Empire at the time when Constantine made his edict and made Christianity the official religion. Within 2 decades, the number of believers jumped from 6 million to 33. Now you can argue about whether like oh, they're just doing it for the tax breaks, or like regardless of whether or not they were true believers, and I don't think we can really judge that. Their kids and their descendants most likely were. And so not only did he save those 16 million people in those 2 decades through like the government's action, it resulted in all of Europe becoming Christian eventually. And so like billions of souls were saved through that one act. And so I'd say through just sheer effectiveness, it still works. So
So the overt, you're tempted towards the overt visible form. Do you think that has any drawbacks or negatives?
Yes, I'd say like a bit like in my paper I talk about sovereignty and like where does the line get drawn? How do you tell if the nation's actually doing God's will or if it's just doing what it thinks is best for itself? And that's kind of the grand question of government, right? It's like are you doing it for yourself or for someone else? And I'd say I'm tempted to give, oh gosh, we read some book in Great Books. Is it Second Treatise of Government, or is it
one of them?
Common Sense? One of those talks about like as long as the trespasses against the people aren't like too grievous, like you should continue in the way that you're doing. I'd say in about the same way, it's as long as the majority of the people think the government is doing God's will, I'd say it deserves a chance to continue doing it. But also, I mentioned in my paper, it's like that's not too reliable because people aren't very good at revolting whenever things get.
Yeah, in some parts they are. Some parts they're very good at revolting. As far as the sovereignty goes, I mean, what other qualities does the sovereign need to have as far as a physical, a visible head? I mean, do I qualify then as being able to be a sovereign in a nation like this since I'm Christian?
I'd say the organization of this nation is kind of like it. I feel like it's rather relative. I feel like there are better options. I don't think democracy is the way to go with it though, because like truth like is something objective. It's not defined by a majority vote. And so I'd say like the people as a whole shouldn't get to vote on what is true, because that's not something that should be like a vote should be cast on, because if I want to should everyone get $1 million? It's like, well, yes, that'd be fun, but that's not really beneficial or truth. And so I'd say probably some form of aristocracy or republic, something to that effect. But once again, it goes back to the whole question of government. How do we make it work?
Yeah, and so I think the thought is so do they have to be overtly Christian? Must they be in order to lead the state?
I'd say yes, at least for this.
Yeah,
because having a Christian nation be led by non-Christians, I feel like they're not in it for the right reasons if they're not Christian. Yeah,
and they certainly want to interpret the laws in a way consistent with the scriptures, and they certainly want to have the things of God that they be about. So how should we go about, enforcing that the state be? Because, for our U.S. State, our First Amendment rights don't allow for our religious thoughts and beliefs to interfere or to be entangled with the state governing.
Okay. So you're asking what's personal freedoms? Like, how does that play into all this? Or
Yeah, I mean, what changes would need to make place? I mean, because our First Amendment says that we shouldn't allow for the state and church to interfere.
Well, I'd say like the original intention of like Thomas Jefferson's letter about like separation of church and state is like that's been completely reversed on what it was trying to like say, and so like he was inferring that like one church shouldn't be able to like completely subjugate other Christian churches. That was what that was talking about. He was worried about like the Protestants just like oppressing the Catholics, and I'd say that that's been wildly like misconstrued. I talked about this in my interview with Tim Dunn, actually, that like that wasn't what the original intention of that was at all. Like the original intention wasn't that church and state should be completely separate, and I don't think that's a positive thing. I don't think it has been a positive thing for our country.
So do you think that the state then should make sure that people, or we do encourage only one religion?
I'd say yes. I think for an example, like if you believe something to be true, and like if we believe that Christianity is the only way to get into heaven, why would you like hide the gold bar under other pieces of trash, like things you know aren't correct? Why would you allow for the option for your people to choose poorly? Like, why would you dilute the truth with more wrong options? I'd say. And if people don't want that like limiting of freedom, they don't have to like live there. They like, there's plenty of other nations that like let them do what they want. But this was for Christians because we don't have one. So
there definitely raises a lot of the questions of how to carry out that law right consistently. So I'll list one. Should we, when we carry out these laws, do we just pick up what the scripture says about all the Old Testament practices? So should we pick up with biblical slavery and the death penalty for certain punishments?
I'd say like the Bible, like, so the book I read, it was like Foundations of Social Order. It talks about how like the penalties inscribed in the Bible, those aren't like the only penalty for those things. Those are like up to a certain amount, and so it's like penalty for public homosexuality is like death. It's like, but we don't have to like kill them. That's really extreme. And so like I'd say that functions with like the church is like it's grace. Like we're not just going to be killing all the sinners. That doesn't work. So
of course not.
Yeah.
One final one there. I mean, should we then have laws about only having one God and no idols?
I'd say yes. Like if we truly believe this to be the truth, then we should encourage it to the people. And so, like, now enforcing that is it should be encouraged. I don't think you can actually enforce that, but I'd say for the nation, it's yeah.
So, how would you encourage that? By just simply urging the people to do whatever, but
I'd say honestly,
not having penalties or punishments.
I think the early Christian Roman Empire had the right idea. Tax breaks and like just easier taxes. It seemed to work for those 16 million. So just the passive, like there are benefits to doing this. Go to church on Sundays. You only have to pay half as many taxes. I'm like, whoa, dang, that's a good deal. Maybe Islam's not working out for me anymore. And then it only takes like one generation of converts to just make it stick. And so, yeah, I think that's what I'd say.
Okay, thank you.
I know the answer to this, but what's your younger sister's name?
Oh, jeez. It's Caroline.
Caroline, is this what your dinner conversations are like at your house?
Yes.
I am truly sorry, Caroline.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Whoa. All right. Then never mind.
See?
I would be truly sorry, but you are not. That is awesome. This is gives me plenty of interesting things to think about. I guess what I hear you saying is you are looking. It's sort of like the Mars colonization. You're looking for people who will join you in the free state of Agnew someday. That will
Not Agnew. That's way too arrogant. No, yeah.
Well, I am not yet convinced that I will sign up to go to Mars with you. I guess we'll find out.
That's understandable. Yeah.
It's that's a long ride out there. So you've brought up some things historically. It sounds like you're a great student of history. Would you say, like, I guess you use Constantine as an example? Are there other people who like started a new free state that you would say, yeah, they did it this way, and I would give them a passing grade for launching a nation or sovereignty in the way that you're prescribing?
Well, not really launching, but just existing. I'd honestly say medieval Spain is the best example of that.
Okay, I don't know much about medieval Spain.
Like half of Iberia was Muslim. Like they were pushed back into a corner, like cut off from France. They weren't doing too well, and like my sister did a whole presentation on it. Isabella, right? Yep. Yeah. Like Isabella said, like, all right, no more. Like people are getting damned on the other side of the border. Like we have to like do something. And so like they reconquered Iberia and like put in place the Christian like incentives. And Spain was Christian for like 800 more years.
Might be about to embarrass myself, but is that the same period of history that the Spanish Inquisition happened?
It was after that. So it was, I think, oh gosh, I don't actually know the time frame, like 200 years after, 100 years after, somewhere in there. I don't know.
So, yeah, any other social experiments that you've seen this work out in history? I guess just as you talk about, billions of people who have walked the planet, you've pinpointed one very tiny subset. I'm just wondering how often this has been tried and has been successful.
Well, the Roman Empire kind of just did all of it at once. It kind of like made Europe Christian, and then that just expanded outwards. There wasn't anybody who like Rome is really the only example of somewhere where it was like grassroots to being in charge. Yeah. And so that I think that's the only real example of that's happened, because Christianity's been there since. So yeah.
You said this is the ultimate goal: redemption and salvation for as many souls as possible. Where'd you come up with that idea?
Well, so like the two greatest commandments, right? Like love God, love others. Like we can love God by idealizing His truths and like trying to live in a way that would be pleasing to Him, and carrying out like what He like would want to be done here on earth. And loving others would be like doing what's best for them. And if like you have a friend who's a drug addict, it's like loving them is sometimes like getting them out of the addiction, which isn't pleasant, but it's good for them in the long run. And so, yeah. Sure.
Okay. It made me think of some verses. I think there are. You have some support for that idea.
Thank goodness.
The Lord is not slow about His promises, as 2 Peter. As some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. There's other verses that say similar ideas to that. That He really wants this to happen. How's that working out for Him?
Well, in current examples, not very well. I'd say the church is kind of failing to do.
So, are you accusing God of being inefficient?
No, I think I'm accusing Christians of being apathetic towards what's happening.
Okay. So it makes me think of this term that I hear at the school, utilitarianism. Can you tell us what that is?
Utilitarianism is like using like, oh gosh, Casey, you want to help me out here? No.
We're phoning friends yet.
Dang it. It's like using something practical to get what you want at the end.
I don't know if you like this summary, but I've heard things like the ends justify the means. Do you think that God would say, I wish for none to perish, but all for all to come to repentance, no matter the cost, by whatever means necessary. Like, does the ends justify the means to do something like the Inquisition, or to do what it takes to clean house, to get all the apostates out of the Free State of Alec?
I'm not going to put words in God's mouth, first off, because I'll try to avoid doing that. Yeah. But can I use an example?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Going back to Spain, after they did like the Reconquista and like reconquered Spain, they colonized South America, like all of it, and killed the Aztec pagan priests. Like we'll say, like, generously, 10,000 pagan priests were killed and temples were torn down. That's 10,000 souls they damned. They killed them. And then they imposed Christianity, and every generation since then has been Christian. South America actually has the highest density of Christians in the globe. There have been about 1 billion people who have lived there since then. I'm not going to put words in God's mouth, but I mean, if someone's willing to be the bad guy and like definitely damn those 10,000 souls for the chance of 1 billion being saved, I mean, if they're willing to take that like responsibility of like standing in the judgment seat and saying like, I did that and I thought it was the right thing to do. So yeah.
So would you say that God is utilitarian?
I don't know. I'll be honest, I don't know.
How about the life of Christ? I mean, that we have a lot of stories told about the life of Christ. Would you say that Jesus was utilitarian in his ministry here on earth?
And like what he did?
How he accomplished his objectives.
I mean, I'd say everything he did had a purpose, and like everything he was doing was like building towards something greater, which was like opening the door to salvation for everybody. So I mean, off the top of my head, I'd say yes, but.
So why didn't Jesus put your plan into place? Because I think he had his zealots, he had his people that were ready to take over, that they were ready for him to ride into Jerusalem on a white horse and kick the Romans out. Why do you think he didn't do that?
That wasn't what he was here to do. It was to open the door to salvation for everybody. And he did that. He wasn't trying to install some Christian nation on the world, because it wouldn't have worked yet.
That's your job, I guess.
I wouldn't say that, but I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
That is a very interesting question, and a response I didn't predict, honestly, because that was one of my thoughts as well, as like why didn't Jesus just make the Christian state at that moment, and that's a pretty valuable reason as to why not. I think. So
yeah, people wouldn't have been saved yet. It didn't work yet. So
very interesting. So we've got some questions from online. So this is a good one. Mr. Nelson says, Romans 13:1 states, the authorities that exist are appointed by God. So with this being the case, how are governments at odds with God over sovereignty if they are acting as these appointed authorities?
Well, I'd say like God allows you to be in control. God like gives you like God's like, I allow you to do this. Like you have my like blessing to act. But I don't think that's always like God's happy with what you're doing. And I'd say it's like if we just hands off, it's like God wills it to happen. I'd say, the Holocaust, like Nazi Germany killing, if we say like God wants it to happen, that's a really like bold thing to say, I'd say. And so I'd say humans still have a part to play in the whole system. I don't think it's just hands off, God wills it. I think we still have things to do here. So.
All right, so from Annalie Dunn, Plato's Republic, who is it that Socrates says should be the rulers within the most virtuous society? And do you agree with this idea?
Philosophers? Yeah. I agreed with it then. I haven't given much thought since then, so I'll go with my previous answer with yes. So
How would it connect to this system that you're talking about?
I think it requires somebody who, like, I don't know, like you said, it sounds dirty, but like, ends justify the means. It's like someone who has the whole picture in mind. I don't know, like someone who is willing to like make the leaps of judgment. I don't know.
So, connecting that utilitarian thought, there's another one from Legend Hoffman that I think is a question that I wanted to ask too, in this regard. And so, didn't God love us enough to have the option to deny Him? And so, how can humans eliminate the option that God gave us?
Oh, we don't. No, not at all. Yeah, we can't make people believe. That's not something within our power to do. That's like, no matter how hard governments have tried, they still have free will. Like, you can't get rid of that. That's kind of built in. And so it's like religious persecutions throughout history. You can't really force somebody to be saved through your religion, but you can offer incentives for it. And so you have to have people decide to do it. You can't make people. So did I answer the question? Okay, cool.
Because it is the utilitarian idea. I know this is something we haven't really talked about at all with regards to this this year. So it's a very big can of worms. I'm reminded as well of the passage in the Brothers Karamazov about how Jesus and the Grand Inquisitor, and how he just sort of like sits there and smiles at him. Right? This whole time he's sort of ranting and raving about what should be done. And so with that example, I mean, we talk about, you've mentioned sort of like perhaps that the ends justified the means with the killing of these Aztec priests and stuff. Could there have been another way?
I'd say, yeah, probably. If, like through like grassroots Christianity, missionaries and stuff, it's like, yeah, they would have been saved eventually with enough concentrated effort. But how many people would be damned in the meantime because grassroots Christianity acts slowly? I'd say, yeah, it definitely works. I'd say you're right there. And like, here in America, like Francis's oral, I really liked it because it talked about like interpersonal grassroots Christianity. That was a great way to like talk about it. Yeah.
So then, is it up to the government or the church, or how would they work together to find the best possible option to sort of like stir up this grassroots community to avoid things like murder?
I'd say the church is like definitely supposed to spearhead all of that. Like, how much better would everything be if like your community church was in charge of like taking care of the homeless in your community, or like evangelizing to like people who came and visited, like things like that. That shouldn't be up to the government because that's not their job. That's not part of what they're there for. And so, yeah, the church is in charge. It should be responsible for like actually doing God's work
For that spreading of
Yeah.
the revival. Okay, cool. So that leads me to two other questions that I have that are basically two things you just touched on or alluded to. So one of my questions that I think you've almost answered, but I would like a specific answer for, is like when you talk about the church. I have this sort of bad tendency of thinking of the church as like an institution, like something like the Catholic system in medieval times, which I don't always like the thought of.
That's fair. Yeah, I agree.
But how would you see the church acting? Like, is it a national institution? Is it local? How do they organize themselves in the system?
I'd say, I mean, the system we have currently, where we have like churches like basically just as pockets throughout. I mean, it seems to work because it's all like community oriented and stuff like that. But I think having like a big council or something where everyone would be like, all right, how do we act out in big ways for God? I think that would be really beneficial for the kingdom.
It's like a return to the councils of the old days.
Yeah, like early church council in IC. Yeah, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Those should be.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. I don't like how fragmented Protestantism right now is. I feel like it's like, because like mid-cities, it's like some of you go to mid-cities, some of you go to like Midland Bible. They don't really interact at all. And so it's like, I don't feel like that's right. We're all Christians. We should be communicating, helping each other. And I feel like that's a big part where we're struggling right now. So
Excellent point. And so the other thing that I have is that if the church is responsible for doing these things, then how can the state point people towards the church? How does it direct people towards the church?
I'd say, like I said earlier, through like legislation and like you get a tax break if you like go to church, and like the just exposure effect, right? Oh gosh, there was some example. It was if someone offered you $1 million if you went to a jazz concert every weekend for a year. It's like, you may not like jazz at the end of it, but you're more likely to like jazz at the end, especially if I incentivize you to do it. And so it's like you may not be a Christian, but if I offer you incentives to go to church and go through the motions, you're more likely to be open to it at the end. And so, yeah.
So is that all the state does
Well,
in the system?
and I mean internally, I mean there's a lot of things that state kind of has to do to make things run. I don't know. I'd say that's probably one of the more important ones, though. So, yeah. I don't know, postal service maybe.
All right. So I've got 2 more questions before I pass them to Mr. Custer, and it's already.
Oh, poor Paria's never going to get asked
All right,
another
so
one.
all right, so never mind then. You have other interesting questions, I know. So one fun question that I want to ask you. All right, so if you did have the opportunity to name this country,
Oh my gosh.
name its capital.
I have no idea. Please don't make me answer this. No.
Play a game of civilization, right? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I have no idea.
Civilization for when you just made a new city.
I don't know. Maybe Galatia or something. Something old churchy, you know? Like, Priya would name it Euclidia. Yeah.
Well, very nice. Good job.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have one final question I want to pick up on Mr. Priya's. Christ, the first time when he came, he did institute this Christian state. In the future, there's different views about how things will go. Some think that as we continue in the world's going to keep going down, and it's just going to, dumpster spiral until it blows up, and however you want to say. Mm-hmm. But what's going to happen, of course, Christ is going to return, and he's going to set everything right.
Yeah, make everything better.
Yeah. There's some views that say, well, the church, in the first one, the church still might grow and might go down. And others say that the church might grow, and as it grows, it actually begins to usher in this Christian state, and it gets to the point that soon enough the whole world loves the kingdom of God, that God simply comes down and rightfully takes his place. But the people first of the world love him, and to the point then he does return.
Yeah.
How do you think Christ will do this in the second return?
Oh my gosh. I have no idea. But I mean, oh gosh, what is the second one called? There's a word for it, isn't there? Postmillennialism.
Postmillennialism is one of the names that we kind of usher in. The kingdom is ushered in by the church.
I mean, I have absolutely no idea. I don't like reading Revelation because it's scary. So I don't feel like any of us actually know how it's going to work. But I think regardless of how we think it's going to end, I feel like we still have a responsibility to try to make things better in the now, because it's like things suck right now. God doesn't want it to be as bad as it is. I feel like we deserve, we ought to try to make it better in the meantime. Even if we fail, it's still that we can stand before God and go we tried to make it better. And if the first one's the answer, and the world does get bad, and that's whenever Jesus comes back, whenever everything's falling apart and it's hell. Well, it's we were wrong. We thought we could make it better, but it worked out in the end, regardless of like our wrong intentions. But if it's the second one and we never do anything, and we're like, the world will get bad and Jesus will come back, well, I'll never come back then. And so I feel like regardless of like which answer it is in the end, I think we still have to try to make things better in the now. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a few thoughts to follow up on, but I'm going to pass it.
Well, to Mr. Akup's point earlier, you've written many versions of this. There have been many people throughout time who have explored these ideas, and you just really can't cram it into 56 minutes of conversation or, plus an oral. So, but this is fun, and I hope that it's fun's not the right word. Uncomfortable.
That's fair.
Like
Yeah.
But well, yeah, I'll leave it at that. But I think it's interesting. You have this picture in your mind of what the free state of Alexandria would be.
Don't call it that.
Okay. The free state of Euclidia would be.
Sure, that'll work.
Yeah.
We'll take that.
But then, like you say, like in the meantime, do these things, and like the things that you propose, like they kind of seem very contrary to the things that you are proposing that the government would do. Build relationships, teach your kids, promote your community. Like that seems like nothing like apostate cleansing.
I said nothing about apostate cleansing. I said nothing about genocide.
So, like, what is it that, like, the things that I should do right now are so different than kind of these extreme things that it would take to actually put the best case scenario in place?
Well, the steps to make the world better, like, they're not hard. That's just what the early church did. And like the things we've talked about, those aren't like this is what we'll do. That's things that have happened. We talked about that. Mm-hmm. I don't want those things to happen.
Yeah, okay.
But it's like just talking about like things that have happened, and I just want things to be better. Mm-hmm. And I think they could. Yeah. And the path to that doesn't have to be apostate cleansing, as you put it.
Okay. And yeah, I think some of it's just like this is what Jesus is really offering each of us to do in the new covenant. I mean, maybe there will come a day when the government will be on his shoulders, and it is kind of this distinction that Mr. Custer is bringing up of, is that the church's job or is that Jesus's job later? Or I guess we'll find out. But like you're saying, we just need to act in faith right now, and there's something that we as individuals can do, whether we're brave enough to be the next Constantine or not. Okay, so I'm actually very afraid of what you might ask us, so I'll pass the mic so I don't have to answer it first.
Okay, I'll go with Akup first. What's your like funniest story you've had at MCA?
So I was an edgelord when I was at MCA.
Oh no.
Yeah, I was angsty. So I didn't pay much attention to positive things, to the detriment of some of my memories. But I mean, most of the positive things I have weren't super funny, but they were just like wholesome and enjoyable. One of the things that stands out that's like specifically humorous is we were asking Mr. Schumann one day about some of his best pranks, because he's a prankster, and
he's so worried.
Sins will find you out.
I don't even know if I should say this.
It's too late now. You have to. Yeah, no backing out.
Because it took me a while to process. There was one time he was telling us like there was this kid who was bothering them at a swimming pool or something along those lines.
He's just laughing.
And so he told them something along the lines of, those lines at the bottom of the pool, they smell like strawberries. It took me a little while to process it, but that was like, that might have been one of the best like jokes I think I've ever heard in my life. So it was, it really brightened my week, maybe my month. So thank you for that.
Curious for those kids, like what happened?
Are they okay?
I'm sure they thought about it before. They were like, "Oh, wait a minute, I should."
Hope so.
I don't know. It depends on how old they were. All right, for you, I've got an interesting one. If you had to delete one movie from the MCU, current MCU, so no cheating, like Incredible Hulk or something, like which would it be? Deletes all of it.
Just delete it.
Yeah.
It's just out of there.
And all like cause and effect from it too. So
Oh. So you're saying like the Incredible Hulk?
you
know, the
can't
one
choose that one.
Yeah. Because I kind of feel like that's the only one that I might be able to take out.
Yep.
Every other one has some important, there's the ether, there's the cosmic cube that comes in, there's, like, Thor the Dark World would be the next selection, but I can't because you get, the power gem from it. We can't take that one out, otherwise there's no Thanos. If there's no Thanos, we don't get the MCU. So all of them plays an integral role, so I feel like the question should be rejected as improper. It's almost like what book should I take out of the Bible? I mean, it's not that sanctosect.
People think I'm heretical. Jeez.
Unholy of a question, but yeah.
That's your. Oh my god.
I feel like I have to say if it can't be Hulk or Thor the Dark World for those purposes, then I can't.
Well, thank you for your eloquent way of saying no. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Mr. Custer, too, was an edgelord while he was at MCA.
You gonna elaborate on that? No. Okay. Okay. For you, Priya, I've got a pretty easy one. What's the best place you've like hiked or traveled to? What's the prettiest?
I was afraid you were going to ask me which proposition I would cut out of.
Which proposition would you?
I was going to answer it the same way.
It's too late. Yeah.
It's too late.
Oh well.
I would refuse to answer your question, so I plead the fifth postulate. I guess it must be the place that I keep going back to, and so that would be Glacier in northern Montana. So I get to go there this summer with a bunch of pals, and I'm really looking forward to it. We were on our way when I had my accident a few years ago, and so this is a redemptive kind of trip. I've had another redemptive trip in between them with some friends, but this will be a fun one to be with my family. So I don't know how all of the end of times are going to work out, whether Jesus is going to put us in charge of different areas of the world to rule and reign with him. But I have my prayers that I would be faithful enough to be a park ranger in Glacier in the Millennial Kingdom.
That's so wholesome.
Yeah, so I've got my spot picked out, so then I don't have to be around all you teenagers.
Oh, okay. Never mind. That's fine.
Can enjoy some.
Yeah, we can stop now. It's fine.
We'll stop now. But yeah, it's just been a gift to have you at our school for these years, and it didn't come out very much. I wish that it would have, but you're also, your mind is a very powerful tool. Yours is, but you're also kind of a softie, which I don't know if people know that about you, but you're just a really good big brother, and you really want to do what God is setting in front of you to do, and so I am excited to see what God will have in store for your future. So you did a great job today, and I'll close with some prayer, and then we can be done. Thank you, God, for your work on this earth, for deciding to involve fallen creatures such as us. We don't understand your mysterious ways always, but we do trust in your sovereignty that you will bring it to a good end, and may you find us faithful to do the things that you've called each of us to do. Thank you for Alexander and his message today, and may we hear in it the words that you have to say to us. In Christ's name, amen.